So thank you. Okay, so we're supposed to have a class on world religions. I want to give Carolyn Schreiner the credit. What's that? Okay. Carolyn Schreiner approached me right after the family was here from Bangladesh. And my first response was, oh, no, I retired. But then I thought, what if I'm supposed to? So we got 5 weeks. And there are a lot more religions than 5, okay? We're gonna do a kind of what I call a scan over, many different things. But the first day, today, let's open with a word of prayer. Morning, Ann. And we will embark. How's that, the right word?
Right, I'm going to move you. Oh, lighting's stupid because of the window right behind this thing.
Yeah. You have to get on your knees, Carol.
On my knees?
No.
That makes me lower.
Yeah, but you're looking up.
I'm already 5'5".
Okay. So let's have a word of prayer. We'll open today, and we'll see where this goes. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for a beautiful, beautiful spring day, early spring day. We pray, Lord, that our hearts are open and our minds are working in gear with what's going on in the world that surrounds us, because it is very confusing and sometimes very chaotic. But Lord, help us to understand how people that we might call neighbors may think differently than we do about matters of religion. And Lord Jesus, we just pray for your guidance. In Christ's name, amen. The 7 semesters I taught at William Penn, I opened every class with the same phrase: I am a Christian, and I'm not apologizing for it. But I also would never degrade or cause a problem with a grade. If you present a paper that disagrees with me and you back it up, you will not be marked down. Okay, I just want everybody to know that there's probably people here that know better answers than what I have for some of these situations. We're going to talk today about what's going on in our world right now, even here in the United States. Okay? Let me give you a little background. Farm boy, me. When I told my dad I wanted to go to college, he laughed at me. I went to college and I fulfilled his every obligation. I never went to class and I came home before the end of the first semester. He was not impressed, as I recall. He never helped. He wouldn't give me a penny, you know. But college in 1962 was a whole lot less expensive than it is today. And so later in life, when I really felt the call of God in my life and I didn't know why or what, I went to school. And that opened up the opportunities to meet people from all walks of life in America. And then later on, as I got more involved in Friends Committee on National Legislation, for example, I went 5 years in a row to the annual meeting in Washington, D.C. I wanted to see what was going on. I wanted to learn and find out there were people that didn't think like me. They didn't look like me. They didn't think like me. And that was okay, because it was like opening up the whole world to a farm boy in Iowa. So I was trying to do all I could do wherever I was called upon for whoever I was working with in the church as a pastor. It didn't matter who you were or what the situation was. But I became exposed to some things that I probably hadn't imagined was going to happen. For example, in 1984, I was called upon in my first church to do a funeral for a man who used to dig at the grave, didn't come to our church, and I found out when I went out to make plans for the funeral service that most of his family were actually Jehovah's Witnesses. And they were not happy that I was doing the service for their brother. That was probably one of the most tense times I ever experienced. But it caused me to do research. Well, what do they believe? And how do they practice their worship? All those kinds of things. Because, am I a minister to all? That's the way I approached it. Yeah. Before that, I spent a year and a half on the island of Okinawa, which was a part of Japan. And I say that as a courtesy of the United States government. I was in the Air Force, and I didn't have a choice. But I saw people that didn't look like me, they didn't talk like me. You know, they said, "Ohio gozaimasu," when they said hello. Good morning. They also had these shrines, which I learned later were Shinto. And they were prevalent all over this place. In 1992, as a pastor, I was called upon to do a funeral service for a young man, a 14-year-old young boy who had a heart defect and had died, and his name was Donald Bakam. He was from Thailand. His family was from Thailand. I went to the house to meet with the family to plan a service. They wanted a little bit of Christianity and a little bit of tradition. A couple years later, I had developed a close relationship with a man named Roland Youngbear because I was trying to reach out to the Meskwaki Indian tribe. And Roland died, and I was asked if I would be able to speak at the graveside. Not traditional at the Meskwaki Indian Nations, as it's called, the settlement. After the service was over, I had the strangest feeling. They did a 24-hour wake in the roundhouse. Then they loaded on the cot he was laying on into the back of a truck, took him down to a wooded area where the family had dug a grave, and they lowered him into the ground in a homemade plywood casket, and then everybody gathered around. I'd had exposure to traditions that were totally foreign to me. With Donald Bakam, with Roland Youngbear. After I left that service, there was a guy from Wycliffe Translators who had worked for 25 years with the Meskwaki tribe trying to write their language. He told me he'd been there 25 years, and it was the first time he'd seen a white man pray at a grave. I thought, wow. Why me, Lord? And then, of course, as a pastor, you run into situations where you might be invited to do a worship, some sort of a funeral service for a person who absolutely has no belief or faith, and yet you're trying to minister to a family and help them through a time of loss. You and I live even in the United States, there are teachings that we don't adhere to necessarily in the church, but the church has many different faces in the United States and in the world. I'll talk a little bit about indigenous people. You know, what's an indigenous person? Okay. The Indian would be indigenous. They're native to that place, yes. I mean, since being in the Quakers and since being a part of Friends United meeting, yes, I have traveled in Kenya and Uganda and Rwanda and Tanzania, and that's true everywhere. They have their practices, some of which I thought, whoa, that's not quite what I was expecting, but they have their practices. How do you speak to those people if you look down upon them or sneer at them because they're not doing it right? And animism is a word. It's a big world, and I'm talking about a world religions overview today. Indigenous people are distinct social and cultural groups that share collective ancestral ties. I hope today when we leave here you understand that many of us have adopted practices that would fit into the indigenous things, whether we know it or not. For example, how many of us use the word karma? Where did that come from? We'll get to that. We'll get to that. But there's just so many little things. I wanted to start with an opening comment here. I feel like one of the things I have learned the hard way is that if I treat people with dignity, model integrity, and do not view others with disdain or contempt, it's amazing how you can build relationships. And people will open up, invite you to their home, and listen to you if you'll listen to them. While I was overseas, I remember reading a book about the ugly American. That was in the 1960s. Okay? The ugly American is this idea the American traveled about and is contemptuous. But wherever they went, they were like, well, you people are stupid. You don't do things the way I do it. You know, that sort of come out. It came out, and it still does when we travel. Some people would say the Americans are horrible by the time we leave their country. Today we will look at animism and indigenous and religion and or cultural beliefs. Where do we start? Where and when did it all start as far as we know? World Religions Overview. What is religion? A set of beliefs that answers the ultimate questions. What is ultimate reality? What is the nature of the world? What is the nature of humanity? What is humanity's primary problem? What happens after death? This is from a textbook used for teaching world religions. These are questions that in some manner, some form, I think just about everybody has tried to sort that out in their own mind. What does this mean for me? I can recall at age 12 standing in the driveway of our farm and looking out to the west, and it was pretty clouds going over, and I looked out there, and suddenly I thought, what's this all about? Why do I have to die? I love life. You know, those kind of questions suddenly popped out in me. And I found I had no answers. Because my picture of God was a man with long white hair, big long white beard, sitting up on the throne in the skies and watching everything we do. And I was trying to figure out how can he watch me and everybody else all over the world at the same time. I couldn't visualize it. Concept of God. Just about everybody has some sort of a concept of the ultimate reality. Morning sexta. On the far left side of the spectrum are the monotheistic religions. What's Christianity? Monotheistic, meaning one God for the world. That say that the God is transcendent. He's the creator of the world, and as such, he is distinct and separate from his creation. That's going to come back pretty good as we go on this morning. On the right side of the spectrum are the monastic. God is a oneness. God is the religions that emphasize God's immanence. They believe that God's essence and the world's essence are one and the same. God is in everything, is everything. He emanates from everything. So people have worshipped rivers, rocks, you name it. We have all been influenced one way or another, I believe, for some of these things, and we'll get to them in a little bit. As far as the right side is concerned, beyond the monistic religions are those atheistic. There is no God. Worldviews that deny God's existence. Yet atheism is similar to monism in that both say ultimate reality is a oneness of substance. With monism, the substance is spirit. With atheism, it's matter or energy. I see head shaking. It's not new or a foreign concept. But you and I have grown up in the age of a lot of atheism in religion, but it's not really called a religion. It's good for the government. It's good for the state. You can find it in the background of major nations. In between the two extremes of the spectrum are the dualistic, the two forces, and the polytheistic, with many gods and religions, serve as intermediate. This little textbook that Joshua loaned to me that I found marvelous compared to this one, which has 500 pages. We could work our way through that. And it doesn't compare to Christianity at all. This book does give you the Christian alternative we'll be looking at. With respect to humanity's primary problem, we would say, and many people will say, it's sin. To the left of that spectrum, there is a sense that humanity fails to live up to the moral precepts of a holy God. To the right, on the other hand, the issue of sin has to do with ignorance, whether of one's true divinity, which is a core element of Hinduism, or of a rational solution to humanity's problems. Secular humanism. Secular humanism. What is that? Please, let's talk about that a minute. What is secular humanism? Any ideas? James?
It's the idea that man can lift things up on his own. I think it's simple.
Yeah. Probably are way extremes in all of that. There is absolutely no God. Or maybe there's a God, so maybe I ought to appease him. You know, all of it and everything in between. But it's up to us to decide everything. Secular humanism is very much a part of our lives. Every day. All the things we see on TV, in the news, and in our advertisements and everything, it's there. Do you recognize it for what it is? That's the question. And that's a big question. Then there's the question of afterlife. Is there an afterlife? Some would say, no, you exist, you dissolve, it's over. And the most important thing is how you affected other people and how will they utilize it going forward. You're helping the next generation, but has nothing to do with afterlife. Others believe that afterlife includes, in some very, what we would say, strange, but they might bring a dead person's bones back every year or every other year, set them in a prominent place in the house, offer them food. One practice I learned a little bit about when I was on Okinawa in the Japanese culture was that every 2 years they opened the tombs, cleaned out the tombs, and then the whole family gathered together, kind of like a big picnic to celebrate their lives, brought flowers and food, and then they would have a big gathering. I thought that was pretty strange when I was there. Then I found out, yeah, different parts of the world, that's not all unusual at all. Where does that leave us? That's the big question that I struggle with. We're going to spend some time today in this concept of spiritual but not religious. There's even an acronym, SBNR. Spiritual but not religious. When you try to talk to your grandchildren about church, what kind of answers do you get? Huh?
Can't see him.
Can't what?
I can't see him, so I don't know.
Okay. Everybody has a different story. But at William Penn, when I was teaching, I began to hear it. I've never been in a church. I've never looked at the Bible, but I consider myself spiritual. But I reject religion. Why? Why do you think it's so hard to get young people into church today? Don't see a value. Maybe they grew up in a church, and what did they see happen inside of a church?
All these shootings and stuff going on.
That's the big extreme today. But if you grew up in the church, what kind of relationships did you see between church members sometimes? Sarah? Not being lived out. You say that very eloquently. Huh? What'd you say, someone? Elegantly. Yes, yes. We don't always treat each other very nice inside the church. Is that fair? Sure. We are human. There are all kinds of traditions. I had written some notes here. How long, let's say I was born and raised in this church. How long does it take for a newcomer to be accepted as a normal part of the church? Yeah, sure. We do that. We don't do it there. We don't do it that way here at our church. Sort of thing comes up. Sometimes. Yeah, absolutely sometimes. I have seen it, walked through it, dealt with it. Innocently. I'm not condemning. It's innocent. This is the way we've always done it. Yet we're trying to incorporate and bring new people in. Otherwise, what happens to us? Dried up. Dried grape? Become a raisin? Yeah. Last Monday night, I went to a special service held at the Cornerstone Church in Ames. They're setting up for 3,800 people for Easter. And they'll have 2 services. they would say they're a welcoming church. We would say we're a welcoming church. I remember having conversations on ministry and council when I was at LeGrand, and I was at LeGrand for 17 years, and they wanted to, the elders wanted to talk about how do we close the back door. People come in, they visit us, and they talk about how friendly we are, and we talk about how friendly we are, but they move on. And 2 years from now, they start to just drift away. And that's a big question that a local church struggles with. It's not just one church that does that. It's all of us have done that. You and I need to understand, and that's why I want to talk about this SBNR, spiritual but not religious. It's a fairly new thing since the year 2000. It's really become prominent. The young people will tell you that over and over and over again. And hopefully we can see and understand better what is going on in the world today as a beginning. We want to be an open and welcoming church. But how do we live it out? That's one big question. That's not all the answers, but that's a question.
The young people, though, look at religion as a denomination. Are they saying they don't like to be in the denomination per se? They want, they don't want the rules of a church? Is that why they're
That's part of it. Sure, it's part of it. And part of that is because if they grew up in a church, like I did, and we saw the conduct of church members sometimes in a business meeting, and we walked out and said, well, if that's what this is all about, I don't have anything to do with it. Literally, that has happened. I witnessed it as a 15-year-old in my local church down at New Sharon. Wasn't intentional, maybe. Okay? We're afraid to talk about it, generally. And, of course, it's almost always the pastor's fault. See? Got a lot of head nods on that one. Well, if we had a different pastor, it'd be different. Maybe.
I think one of the things that's happened since 2000 and a little bit before, there's a lot of very well-known pastors have gotten caught in traps of abuse, getting wealthy on the backs of their congregations, and there's been a lot of abuse in various groups.
Sure.
They advertise better than others, and it's all over the social media, and young people see that, and that drives them away. And it drives
Sure.
others away.
Sure.
I think politics has walked into the church.
Yes, sir. Politics has
It needs to turn around and walk back.
walked into the church and needs to walk back out. Pretty easy if we are married to a political party and we see everything through those eyes. That's the thing that I found remarkable. I don't care if I was in Turkana, out under a thorn tree, or in Jamaica. First time Joyce and I was on sabbatical, went to Jamaica, and we had, I was to speak at Happy Grove School. I was actually participated at the school, and we spoke at Seaside Friends Meeting, the absolutely most gorgeous place I'd ever been in my life. They had a great big window that just opened up to the sky right behind the pulpit, and there was the ocean, the Caribbean. Just, whoa. Was the most beautiful thing I'd ever witnessed. And I remember kind of almost pinching myself thinking, am I really doing this? The day later, I went to their ministry and council meeting. See, it's a friends church. And they were discussing the exact same problem with the youth that we had just talked about in LeGrand the week before. Young people want that kind of music. We can't allow that. We must sing the hymns. And I went into the high school as a counselor for 10 days with the two young ladies that were counselors, and I'm so shy. I'm getting goosebumps. I'm not sure I'm supposed to go that deep. But literally, now these were Jamaicans, black skin, two of the most beautiful young women I'd ever seen in my life. One was very dark, and the other was lighter. And one day when I came into our pre-meeting before we went out into the classes, there was a Jamaican teacher there, and he was flirting horribly with these young women. They were 21, 22, and 23-year-old counselors for the high school. And I couldn't believe the way he was talking to these young women. They weren't saying anything back. And after he left the room, I said to them, I said, "Is this like this all the time?" She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "If he did that in America right now, he'd be fired." But the one lady who was very, very dark said to me, "It'll be very difficult for me to ever be married." The other lady will be much more popular because she's lighter skinned. And she referenced Oprah Winfrey in that conversation. I never forgot it. Stereotypical. Now, it turned out not to be true because I heard a couple years later that the lady that was very, very dark had gotten married. And I was very happy. But we judge people by the craziest ways, you know. We just do. And it's not just Americans. It's all over the world. Two of the most wealthy pastors in the world are Nigerian. I've read some articles on that. They have massive churches, patterned similarly to stuff they've seen on TV in America, I'm sure. So anyway, our allegiance is supposed to be to God, not to the pastor, ever. I think that's true. Let me finish this. This is a little thing. Richard stared into his empty coffee mug for a good 30 seconds before he spoke. "I'd have to say that I am spiritual but not religious," the man said. He paused as he looked up to make eye contact with me. He says, "I believe, I really, truly believe. It just might not look like what you expect." Richard's sincere description of his faith is a growing phenomenon in America. Yet I'm not convinced that we know what Richard's words truly mean. I am not all too sure that Richard really understands what the phrase spiritual but not religious means. Does spiritual but not religious mean that he believes in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, but is skeptical of belonging to a church because of old wounds? That's what we were talking about. Does it mean that he believes in a higher power or some sort of spiritual force out there, but not Christianity? Does it mean that he is all about Jesus Christ and participating in his local church, but wants to convey that faith is a relationship, but not religion? It's a relationship and not a religion? A born-again experience that is more than doing good works. Look at all the things I'm doing. That makes me special. Maybe even better than you. That somehow or another leaks out into the way we think sometimes. With the interesting identification SBNR in rural America, the rural church needs to better understand what SBNR means. I was over at, I was a superintendent. I was over at Bear Creek Friends Church. They were talking about closing their doors. It's straight. west of Des Moines, out in the country. I was there more than once because they were talking about, they were down to about 15 people, and they were concerned about having to close the doors. And I'll never forget this because as I got done, and then that morning there was an elderly gentleman who was a member there his whole life, and he looked at me and he said, "The problem is there are just no Quakers left." He said, "When I was young, all these farms," he went like that, "all these farms around here belonged to Quakers." And then I thought, okay, this is western part of, just west of Des Moines. What's the fastest growing population in the United States located? Where's it located? Just west of Des Moines. And I had driven by brand new houses being built on acreages all the way out as I drove to our little friend's church. Now, just recently, and maybe we have somebody here who can fill it in farther, there's been a couple families from some of those new houses with children start attending and starting to get involved in the church, and suddenly there's excitement. That's what I've been told by our superintendent. So it can turn around, but are we willing to allow it to turn around? My point in SBNR talk about it is a rising social group in America in the past 2 decades. It's real. We don't need to be afraid of it. We just need to be open and embracing. Stand firm in who we are, but love people that maybe don't think just like I do. We're on the edge of so much that could happen. This is a picture of, if you were to break down what we're going to be doing here in the next 4 weeks. I want to talk about Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity. Christianity will be on Easter Sunday. Okay? Perfect, isn't it? That's good. As we get into it, you'll find out Hinduism is the mother or father, whatever way you want to put it, of a whole host of religions that we have around the world. And they're here just as well. Okay? These are all kinds of maps available on the internet talking about different regions are more heavily this way or that way. In the world today, Christianity is still the number one religion, but just barely. Because Islam is an evangelical religion. They are seeking converts, and they are bringing new people in. I'll take Kenya as an example. Now, this is the political side. But you're absolutely right. While I was in Kenya several years ago, I was told that our government, through the State Department, was urging Kenya, when they rewrote their constitution, to change their rules on religious faith to allow more openness, including our sexualities. And if they didn't write it the way the United States State Department was recommending it, then maybe their foreign aid might be curtailed. And I thought, well, yeah, sure, okay. But I was in Belize a few months later, and I heard the same exact story. So the reason I mention that is that the playing field isn't the way it used to be. Both of those countries were British colonial outreach, okay? So there's some commonalities there. So the world has been changing sometimes right under our nose and we weren't paying attention. So in Kenya, for example, the Muslim faith has placed all these mosques along with the school, and the school is free. In a country where they're begging for anybody to help pay for their children's education, what kind of an attraction would that be? Well, sure, they're having influence. That's going on all around the world. So it's important that we, if we're following our Christian faith, understand that and learn how to talk the language and show the difference. Okay? We're not alone. The attraction of animism, and we'll get this, I want to boil this down to a little bit more. You and I are more involved with this than we realize. It is popular for some because it infuses the sacred into a reality that has been emptied of anything spiritual by the scientific evolutionary perspective. Animism puts the mystery back into the secularized, matter-only world. Second, animism holds an attraction because it offers people a way to cope with one's everyday needs and problems, such as the need to, and then I said page 34. You think, what is animism? You ever have anybody have a special necklace with a special amulet on it and wear it because it offered protection? If you'll just wear this, it'll take care of you. You see it all the time in TV and movies and stuff, you know. I've seen a police story. I remember this one time. A policeman was graduating from school, and somebody gave him a particular amulet and said, "You'll need to wear this to protect you." It's in all forms and manners. It's in our religions sometimes, very much so. One of the reasons that we should know what this is, it is popular for some because it infuses the sacred into a reality that has been emptied of anything spiritual by the scientific evolutionary perspective. Animism puts the mystery back into the secularized, matter-only world. Second is animism holds an attraction because it offers people a way to cope with one's everyday needs and problems, such as to be treated for an illness, to be successful in a business endeavor, to find a job, to excel in school, to restore a soured relationship, to find a mate, to gain guidance for the future. All kinds of suggestions are offered. If you'll do this, then this will be okay. Is that part of our true faith? Or is that part of animism, where we take something out of life and we kind of hold that out as special? There's another little word. Did I write it in here? What's a talisman? That's kind of what I'm talking about. An object, typically an inscribed ring or stone, that is thought to have magic powers and to bring good luck. There are people in the church that can do that and believe that. See, it's here in us, whether we understand it or not. What is karma? I hear that word all the time. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the sum of a person's actions in this and previous states of existence viewed as deciding their fate in the future. Right? That's what karma is. Bad karma or good karma? Sure, we use that phrase, it intermingled with our language today all the time. A Buddha is believed to have completely purified his karma. We'll get into that a little deeper. He has risen to the level where he's totally purified. Destiny or fate following as effect from cause. There's something highly satisfying when karma strikes. You've heard that? Somebody uses that phrase. Karma will get you. It'll come back to bite you. Okay? Most animistic religions teach that there's one supreme being who exists beyond the intermediate ancestors, spirits, and gods. Roland Youngbear, that I did his funeral service, helped do his funeral service. I went to the wake. I sat through the wake. I sprinkled some tobacco on the chest, right across the line with everybody else. I thought, well, it's not quite the way it was, I'm sure, 150 years ago. Because they handed out cigarettes, and you were supposed to tear them apart and use the tobacco. Or if you didn't do that, then you were given a stick of chewing gum. And it was trying to identify and keep in touch with the ancients. I had a man come to my front door in La Grande, and I'd gotten to know him as a young Indian man, and he was saying, he was a Meskwaki, which means woodland Indian. And he had the same experience that Roland Youngbear had as an experience. Roland was dying. He was in the hospital. He had bad diabetes. He had one amputation. They were talking about doing more. And he wanted me to do his funeral. That's what he said. I want a Christian burial. But one of the last nights he was alive, he had a dream. And in that dream, his father came back to him, Indian tradition, and told him if he had any hope of ever seeing his son, he needed to be buried in the Indian way. So we did both. His wife said, let's do what we can this way, and we'll also do the Christian on this side. Strange as this is, now you might think I'm irreligious. There's a grove of trees, and they dug a hole, and the family has to stay by that hole the entire time until he's buried. And then after he's buried, they're supposed to stay there for another 3 days to make sure no evil spirits can get to him. It's the same true with the Indian tribes in Oklahoma, because we've done work down there as well. I know what Roland wanted, because he told me. But he also was trying to please the family. So and I went along with it. When we finished that service, I had the strangest sense of peace come over me that I'd ever had until that point. I thought, wow. That probably was true animism, according to this books today. But what was that strange sense of peace that came over me as a Christian? I didn't have an answer. But I also felt like maybe it wasn't important for me to condemn everybody because they didn't think like I think. What I have found is that has opened so many doors throughout life. It's kind of crazy. Next week, I want to talk about Hinduism. We'll try to dig into it. It is here within our thinking, whether we recognize it or not. I look backwards now as I look back over my shoulder to being in the ministry. When I was at Pleasant Plain Friends Church, and I also pastored Fairfield Friends Church for 2 years, dual. That was the time when Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was becoming strong in Fairfield. And we were trying to figure out how to deal with that in the church. In fact, they got a young man down there right now whom I didn't know until I was in a meeting. He feels like that's his calling. And they are reaching out on that campus because you are reciting a mantra, which is a part of Hindu. But Hinduism also looks an awful lot like Buddhism. And Buddhism can look an awful lot like Confucian or Shinto because they've borrowed from each other in other parts of the world. And we'll kind of break that down and take a look at it a little bit. Sophia, how am I doing?
Good.
Now, Sophia is from Brazil and is a part of South America. And in her church, she met Christ in a church down there that probably looks an awful lot like a typical church here. Yeah. So the gospel is everywhere. Are we willing to embrace the people and perhaps give them something else to consider or to pray about all the time? We have opportunities. Islam, pretty strong. There are some teachings in Islam that are way stricter than what the Christian church is operating as. Way stricter. And I think Christianity has has something else to offer to that. Any questions? You're quiet. Some people might ask the question, why do we need to talk about this stuff? If everybody just come and be like me, we wouldn't have to talk about it. But that's not the world we live in. How many different nationalities are students at Grinnell College? It's a lot. We're going to get into Confucianism a little bit, which is dominant in China. And this somehow or another kind of works itself together with communism. But it's affecting us as far as a nation is concerned. How do we deal with that?